need the counselors. I need some counselors to come help me hand some things out. More stuff for you. Who was excited because you get stuck? Yeah, you guys. They're over there, those 4 baskets. Everybody just gets one. You guys have to grab bags and start handing them out. If you did not get a baggie, raise your hand. Anybody not get one? Luke still has some counselors. Take one up for Luke. Let's go ahead and get focused. So we've been talking about transformation, and the first night, do you remember what we talked about? Hopefully you remember what we talked about. I tried to give you kind of a big picture of what you're going to face this week and how you can listen to the Lord, pay attention to Him, listen to Him. Spend some time outside listening for His voice. And I do hope that you have been able to hear something from the Lord this week through something that someone said or through the Lord even speaking to you through nature. The second night we talked about this whole step process of moving from this egg to the butterfly. The first night in talking about the egg, we talked about how you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Remember? You're loved. That we're knit together in your mother's womb. And last night, in talking about the second stage, this larva stage, this caterpillar stage, how there are practices that we can do in order to grow. And I had about 4 things I was going to share with you, and I just gave you one. Encouraging you to spend time in your closet, in your room at home, somewhere, praying to God. In fact, there's a whole list of what are called spiritual disciplines that help us to grow, like prayer, and Bible study, and coming together to talk about Christ, fasting, worship. There's a whole list of spiritual disciplines. But there are some things that help us to grow that none of us want to face. There's a whole list of things that actually transform us, that are difficult and that are hard. And we're going to talk about those things tonight. There are things that you would never sign up for, but they change your life. So you'll notice I gave you a little baggie and some molding clay. Alright? So you're gonna need both of these. You're gonna need both, so don't throw away your bag, but go ahead and get your clay out. And I'm gonna ask you to make your best likeness of yourself. Just make a person. Don't combine it with other colors and those kind of things. Just make a person, right? Make it that looks like you, right? Do your best. Some of you are like all into this, right? The next step, while you're doing that, I'm going to talk. Like, you can do both of those things, right? While you are talking, while you are doing that, I'm going to be talking about this third step, the pupa step. The step when the caterpillar turns into a chrysalis and everything melts inside of this cocoon. I'm going to play a video, in fact, that tells the story of how a butterfly, how a caterpillar actually changes to a butterfly inside of that chrysalis. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but it's not a pretty process. So if you were to walk up to a chrysalis hanging from a branch, and you were to just squeeze it before it became a butterfly, it would just ooze out like snot. Right? Because when a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly, everything must melt inside of that caterpillar. It all must melt. So we're going to see if the sound works and go to this video.
How about shedding your skin and dissolving your own muscles? Now, believe it or not, that gruesome process is how caterpillars earn their wings. Here's what you might not know about what's inside a caterpillar's cocoon. Contrary to popular belief, this is not a cocoon. Only certain moths build cocoons, which are like a silky sleeping bag that covers the insect. This, on the other hand, is what's called a chrysalis. It's not a sac or a pouch. It's actually the caterpillar's own body. When it's time for the transformation to begin, the caterpillar's body ramps up production of a hormone called ecdysone, and that causes it to cast off its outer coating, sort of like how a snake sheds its skin. And underneath is a hard shell, similar to the exoskeleton of a beetle. After that, life for the little caterpillar gets oozy. First, it releases enzymes called caspases. These rip apart and dissolve cells in its muscles, digestive system, and other organs. But the enzymes don't quite liquefy all of the caterpillar. They leave key structures intact, like breathing tubes. At the same time, specialized cells called imaginal discs start waking up. Before the chrysalis stage, these discs were kept dormant by a series of hormones in the caterpillar's body. But once the transformation begins, those hormone levels take a nosedive, giving these discs the opportunity to do what they do best, build a butterfly. You see, each disc contains the genetic recipe to form a different adult body part, starting from the inside out. After 1 week, the digestive system of the butterfly is well on its way. And by day 16, the adult's legs, wings, eyes, and mouth are all present and in working order. Now, 2 weeks is a remarkably short time for all of this to happen, since each imaginal disc starts out with only about 50 cells and must multiply those into thousands just to form a single wing. And if you checked out the chrysalis around day 16, you might even be able to see those brilliantly colored wings. because for some species, their chrysalis turns transparent in their final days of metamorphosis. Now, fully formed, it's time to hit the road. The chrysalis splits open down the center and the butterfly escapes. Meanwhile, a reddish liquid spills out. That's all the waste the butterfly, named caterpillar, produced during its stay. Once its wings expand and harden, it's ready to mate, pollinate, and slurp nectar to its heart's desire. But one of the most interesting parts of all, research suggests that butterflies and moths can remember their caterpillar days. In one study, researchers trained moth caterpillars to associate an odor with an electric shock. So whenever the larvae smelled it, they'd move away. But even after they transformed into adult moths, they still avoided the scary smell. It makes you wonder what else they can recall from their younger days.
Yeah, so my favorite part of that video is the fact that they shocked the caterpillar. Like to try, I don't know if you missed that, right? I mean, that's what they did to try to see if they could teach the caterpillar, or to see if it would actually remember when it became a moth. They shocked it, gave the smell, and then, I don't know, that's just, people get paid to do that, right? That's a job, shocking caterpillars to discover. So in some of your calling, some of you may really be led into shocking caterpillars, but only do it if it's your job. If you do it outside your job, that's just weird, all right? So don't just go shocking caterpillars. It's astounding to me that a butterfly or a moth remembers pain. Remembers pain. That means there has to be some kind of memory in that butterfly that you see flying around of the shock of melting inside the chrysalis because of the enzyme that was released. So what does this have to do with growing more and more in Jesus? I want to talk to you tonight about pain. I want to talk to you tonight about hurt. I want to talk to you tonight about disappointment and frustration. I want to talk to you tonight about loss and grief. You see, there's a whole list of things that we would choose to do in order to grow. Pray, go to church, spend time in the Word of God, spend time with friends, worship. But there's this whole list of things that actually help us to grow that none of us would choose. Suffering, hurt, pain, grief, hardship, difficulty. Those things in our lives have an even greater impact in your transformation than the positive things. So I want to talk to you tonight, it's somewhat serious, about some difficult things. The pressure that some of you are under, or will be under one day. Whenever I teach, I realize there's two kinds of people in the room. There are people that need to hear this now, and then there are people that will need to hear it later. Right? People that need to hear it now, and then there are people that will need to hear it later. And if you're a later person, would you just give some grace to some people who are currently walking through some really hard times? Because some people actually need to hear this today. And so if it's not for you, realize it will be one day. There will be a day when you will face some disappointment and some grief and some hardship. When the things that you long for will not show up. Because life is difficult. Aren't you glad you came to camp to hear that? Life can be hard. Life can be difficult. And we face hardships. And just because you gave your heart to Jesus, or you're considering giving your heart to Jesus, does not mean you'll be exempt from pain and suffering. In fact, we're going to look at it in a minute. Jesus told us that we're going to have suffering and pain. There's this amazing photograph that was taken in 1989. This is a close-up of the photograph. This man's name is Theodore Malcolm. Theodore Malcolm. And you can't really tell where he's standing. Right now it's kind of just a blurry picture. all you can see is that he's standing next to a railing. But this photograph was taken at the Lagimont Lighthouse outside of France by a photographer named Jean Gucard. And the next picture shows you the setting of this photograph. Go back to the picture just a minute. So this is the close-up of the man who is guarding and at the lighthouse. And a storm had rolled in. And the storm was so heavy that it had taken out doors and windows of the lighthouse. And those that were in the lighthouse thought that they potentially would be rescued. And so when they heard a helicopter, they came out. But it was a photographer. Not anybody who was going to rescue them. But the photographer got this picture, next one. The photographer took this picture. These are waves that are just crashing over this lighthouse. I've always been fascinated by this, well, since 1989. So when I was 19, I was fascinated by this picture. Because it just says this is what life is like sometimes, right? There's stuff that happens. There are waves that crash over us. There's difficulty that comes. There's disappointment that occurs. And it just feels like it's just going to take us over. But those of us who are followers of Jesus, we know that there's something solid, even as everything else around us seems to be crushing or coming around us. This lighthouse still stands there in Lagimont, France. It's still there. By the way, a rescue helicopter did come and get these men out of this lighthouse. But I've always loved this picture because it just speaks to me about what life is like sometimes. Like you're getting ready to get bowled over, Theodore. You might want to hold on to that railing. The next picture shows the waves completely crashing around the lighthouse, and Theodore decides to go back inside. To keep from getting drenched and knocked down. So I want to talk to you tonight about suffering and trouble. Suffering and trouble. And suffering and trouble, they're just words unless you're going through something. It's just ethereal. It's just something in your mind until you really face a really deep, deep disappointment or hardship. And it's different for all of us. There are things that you are walking through that are just causing you to feel crushed, that if someone else walked through, maybe it wouldn't seem so difficult. And the same thing for you, for that other person, that they're walking through something that if someone else walked through, it wouldn't necessarily be difficult. All pain is local, they're the same. And so every one of us faces a time of difficulty. And I'm not sure what yours is, your great disappointment or your couple of series of great disappointments, but I know what mine is. I know one of my earliest disappointments. So when I was younger, my parents, who they really did try, but they were very broken people. My mother had gone through a divorce before she met my dad. And she met my dad in a bar before I was born. And Mom had kind of fled away from her first husband because he was out drinking all the time. And so